Hello tanks and tankettes, and welcome to a view replay courtesy of Denbart123, here seen in the Object 257, which is of course one of the more recent additions to the game. Now, unlike some of the other Soviet tanks that were introduced with, was it 1.0? It wasn't 1.0, was it? No, it was like 9.22, 9.23, I can't even remember which patch it was now, but anyway, some of them have proved to be a little bit controversial, shall we say. This, however, and the one that comes after it at tier 10, do seem to be a bit more on the balanced side. In fact, this, just looking at the stats and looking at the armor profile, seems not totally unlike the T10. It's mobile, it's got actually pretty good turret armor, although the commander's hatches are somewhat significant weak spots, especially close up. But the actual pike nose configuration itself, it's only like 120, 130 mil. So sometimes it'll give you really good troll bounces. But if you're angling too much, or you're giving too much of the lower front plate, you're going to get penned. So it's not got the most reliable armor. It much more is about that mobility and popping up in unexpected places and using your relatively big gun. It's not even a particularly accurate gun. It is very much in that archetype of Soviet heavy tank guns where it hits reasonably well, decent penetration, but the aim time and the rest of the soft stats aren't exactly super. So in those kind of situations, and you know, Himmelsdorf is a map where you get lots of situations where you're staring down corridors at each other. It's not so good for that unless you can find a pile of rubble to hide the body of your tank behind. Or at least so it seems to me, just having looked at it. I haven't actually played this thing. So instead of doing any of that, Denbart is instead using that mobility and has managed to get himself up by the cap circle, although he's going to have to be slightly careful about that prot. But he's managed to come unexpectedly up behind the RU and to some extent the T-34. And the RU was obviously completely focused on the hill, and it's only when Denbart popped around the corner and actually popped one into the rear of his tank that he realised something was amiss. So that's not bad, that's one tank down already, but they are starting to lose traction on the hill, it looks like. I mean, he could have gone up to the hill himself, and it initially looked like there were more than enough tanks going there, which is probably why he didn't. But unfortunately they're being rather overpowered, it seems like. And at least one of them, the Emil 1, is going to have turned out to have done not a lot of anything, and you'll see them get mentioned in the in-game chat a little bit later on, and that's why. And then once we get to the score screens, you will definitely see that the Emil 1 wasn't doing much of anything. So clearly Denbart's very much aware of that Jagdtiger, just waiting for him to pull around the corner. He's being a bit cautious. He definitely wants to finish off that Scorpion though, and so he takes the risk and actually manages to get away with it, because the Jagdtiger wasn't quite, like, they were in a slightly pulled back position. They obviously weren't quite in a spot where they could just snap the shot off as Denbart went past, and so that gave Denbart just the amount of time he needed. This Scorpion, meanwhile, is proving annoyingly difficult to kill, but there we go. Fires off the shot and then just sits there resigned to their fate. They lasted a surprisingly long time considering they only had that amount of health left, but as I said, this gun's not particularly good for snapshots, even at close ranges. So he's linked up with this E100, they're ganging up on the Lerva. The rest of the team, meanwhile, I mean, they've given as good as they've gotten in terms of the actual numbers of kills, but it's a little bit in the enemy team's favour, I would say, at least in terms of the map control, because their own team is really somewhat scattered at this point. And, well, that Emil 1 doesn't really count. You'll see why they don't really count, you really will. So, together with the E100, and he does have most of his hit points left, maybe they can do this, but artillery is doomed. The M41 doesn't exactly have a lot of armour, and as I've said, the Emil 1 might as well have not been in this game for all the contribution even that they are going to make. So it does just come down to really these three tanks here. That's all they effectively have left even against the enemy team. So, going for the enemy artillery, but he runs face first into the IS-3 as well, unfortunately, who puts an APCR round through his front. But possibly the APCR wouldn't even have been needed. The GF, however, does get the killing shot there. That was actually a really good shot. That was, I don't even know, HE to the top of the turret maybe. And although Denbart then obviously has the intention of following that up by trying to go and kill artillery, the E-100 pings him for help, and Denbart wisely decides that actually, yeah, rather than get greedy for the kill, let's be sensible, let the M41 do it and go and back up the E-100, because they can't afford to split up at this point. They really can't. They only have, you know, a couple of tanks left. But so does the enemy team. They're going to have to work together to do this. That goes for both sides. You know, neither side has a massively clear advantage at this point. So there's the WZ. He actually gets a heat non-penetration from the WZ, which is really quite lucky. I'm not sure where that hit exactly, but anyway. The WZ as well, of course, has sort of a pike nose too, but it's of a somewhat different configuration. But as they are trying to side scrape with the pike nose, and as Denbart is now themselves using their own heat ammo, which, you know, this is it. Backs against the wall. This is crunch time. So if you're going to reach for the premium ammo, now's the time to do it. Yeah, he's managed to get a shot in himself, and so he's actually now got a bit of an advantage against this WZ-111 because he can afford to take more hits potentially, although at most 2, because we're talking high tier guns here. So this is where it starts to go a bit wrong. Peeks around the corner, takes a high roll from the WZ, again heat shell, not a surprise. And he can't really afford to play peekaboo against somebody that's hull down like that. Now, while he's been trying to deal with this WZ, they've been pushing up from the other side. So there goes the M4190 and the E100. I mean, at this point, I think I would have maybe tried to back up the E100, but the E100 themselves made the fatal mistake of going forward and giving basically, you know, rear and side armor to the T28 Prot, and that's proved to be their undoing, and it's actually the LT100 that gets the kill. Meanwhile, Denbart just went for it. I mean, there really wasn't much else he could do. Like, there was no time for any fancy plans at that point. He went forward, took the hit, which, in a weird little twist of RNG, was exactly the same amount as the previous hit, 523. There we go, that's a really important kill. So, again, it was a high roll, but not high enough to kill him. So now we're down to this, 1 versus 1. Him versus a T28, and the T28, I'll tell you now, is going to require more than 1 hit to kill. His armor might resist a T28 shell, but they're going to know he's low health, so if the T28 is in any way sensible, they'll be loading HE. Thus begins a roughly 7-minute game of cat and mouse, because Denbart cannot afford to take any hits and therefore cannot afford to take any risks. The one big advantage that Denbart has is mobility. The Prot is not a mobile machine. So what he needs to do is take this Prot by surprise, get in a hit, and then somehow survive long enough to get in another hit. It's a bit of a tall order. At this point, once upon a time, I'd have reached for the most recent copy of the Stornoway Gazette and tried to pick out 1 or 2 amusing items of local news for you, but I'm sad to say that the quality of the Gazette has just diminished to the point that it's not even amusing in a really, you know, kooky local way anymore. It's just, I don't know, the paper itself has gotten slimmer and there's just a lot more syndicated content in it now. So yeah, for those of you wondering why I've not done a Gazette video in a while, that's it. It's just not fun anymore, and it's such a disappointment. So instead, I'm going to read a poem, and that might seem like a bit of a non sequitur, but it's kind of in the same vein. It's poetry so bad that it's brilliant, and I wanted to introduce you all to William McGonagall, and some of you will know that name already, but for those of you that don't, he is famously one of the worst poems in the English language who has ever lived, and you will possibly see why after I'm done. So the one I'm going to read out is the Tay Bridge Disaster, one of his most well-known works, and well, this is going to be a wild ride, so strap yourselves in. Beautiful railway bridge of the Silvery Tay. Alas, I am very sorry to say that 90 lives have been taken away on the last Sabbath day of 1879, which will be remembered for a very long time. 'Twas about 7 o'clock at night, and the wind it blew with all its might, and the rain came pouring down, and the dark clouds seemed to frown, and the demon of the air seemed to say, "I'll blow down the Bridge of Tay." When the train left Edinburgh, the passengers' hearts were light and felt no sorrow, but Boreas blew a terrific gale, which made their hearts for to quail, and many of the passengers with fear did say, "I hope God will send us safe across the Bridge of Tay." But when the train came near to Warmit Bay, Boreas he did loud and angry bray, and shook the central girders of the Bridge of Tay on the last Sabbath day of 1879, which will be remembered for a very long time. And so the train sped on with all its might, and bonny Dundee soon hove in sight, and the passengers' heart felt light, thinking they would enjoy themselves on the new year, with their friends at home they loved most dear, and wished them all a happy new year. So the train moved slowly along the Bridge of Tay, until it was about midway. Then the central girders with a crash gave way, and down went the train and passengers into the Tay. The storm fiend did loudly bray, because 90 lives had been taken away on the last Sabbath day of 1879, which will be remembered for a very long time. As soon as the catastrophe came to be known, the alarm from mouth to mouth was blown, and the cry rang out all o'er the town, "Good heavens, the Tay Bridge is blown down!" And a passenger train from Edinburgh, which filled all the people's hearts with sorrow, and made them for to turn pale, because none of the passengers were saved to tell the tale of how the disaster happened on the last Sabbath day of 1879, which will be remembered for a very long time. It must have been an awful sight to witness in the dusky moonlight, while the storm fiend did laugh and angry did bray, along the railway bridge of the Silvery Tay. "Oh, ill-fated bridge of the Silvery Tay, I must now conclude my lay, by telling the world fearlessly, without the least dismay, that your central girders would not have given way, as many sensible men do say, had they been supported on each side with buttresses. At least many sensible men confesses, for the stronger we our houses do build, the less chance we have of being killed." Yeah, so that's a thing. He wrote lots and lots. That was not a one-off. I actually had an idea that this partly arose out of Dungeons and Dragons, actually. But you know, at some point I had an idea of what if I did a bard character that recited the poems of William McGonagall, and so I went looking them up online. I'd forgotten how bad they were. It was years and years ago I first encountered them, but yeah, no, they're truly something special. Anyway, we're about to, with perfect timing, actually get back into what's happening in the game. There's the T-28 prop. We obviously had a bit of an indication that they were nearby the cap because they'd driven through the cap. But yeah, that was an HE shell. So clearly they are being sensible. Clearly they are firing their HE. But they're unlikely to have a huge number of shells. So that might work out in Denbart's favour. So this is the point where the superior mobility is definitely going to come in useful. He really does have to break contact in order for this to work. There's no point laying an ambush, and the T-28 is not going to come around the corner and just, you know, while he's sitting there, essentially, while he knows Denbart's sitting there. So if this isn't to be a loss or a draw, I mean, it really comes down to just trying to outguess and outplay the other person. So he's used his mobility to come around here. But the prot, you know, let's not forget, the prot is not as immobile as it once was. And so actually they've managed to get around the corner. There we go. He gets in the hit, and that happens. Yeah, I don't know. I think he hit the gun. Anyway, he does actually then get a bounce, and whew, there we go. So yeah, one of them was genuinely a bounce. That first one though, I think it hit the tip of the gun and didn't turn it yellow because it didn't do any damage whatsoever. So it was a good ending. Denbart managed to win, but it was also a hell of a lucky game in some regards. I mean, the twin high rolls from the WZ-111-1A were not enough to finish him off. And then at the end there, that T-28 just being utterly unable to finish the job, that meant he could have that chance to win. And so, well, it was a bit of a hard carry. It was definitely a carry, but there was definitely some luck involved there as well. But hell, sometimes the closest games do involve a bit of luck. We also got to see the very unusual sight of a Bruno's medal, which the requirements for are destroying 3 or 4 enemy tanks whilst having 5 different modules damaged or crew members knocked out and losing 80% or more of your hit points. So basically, you have to get pretty thoroughly beaten up and yet still somehow get a bunch of kills and survive a match, which we can definitely say Denbart did. So it was a good game, and it showed maybe some of the strengths of the tank, some of the weaknesses of the tank, and also a little bit of lucky RNG. But hey, you know, that's all the tanks in a nutshell. And for those of you that really just absolutely must have more William McGonagall, well, I'll bear him in mind for other replays where we get stretches of not a lot happening, but I will also put a link in the description below where you can go and basically read all of his amazingly awful poetry online. Spike Milligan was a fan, and if that's not enough to commend it to you, then I don't know what is. So hopefully you've enjoyed this replay, and if you have, you can hit the like button, you can leave any comments below, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.